Welcome back to the Budding Author Podcast with me, your host, Simon Ward. Today, we're talking to a relatively new author, Eddie Johnson, as author of Breaking the Tranquility of Solitude. Hi, Eddie. How you doing? That was a bit of a mouthful. I did that without a rehearsal. How about
that? Yeah, it's an unusual title, to say the least.
Yeah, it's got 80s references, I think, hasn't it?
From the many 70s, 80s, and 90s. Well, just references in general. I like to allude to things.
I think you've sort of put a trilogy together, which is really good. What's your inspiration to start writing?
Basically, multiple dreams that I've had over a 20-year period that I've never really done anything with. And some time ago, well, probably 10, 15 years ago, it was getting to the point where I'd have the exact same dream, word for word, in colour. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to write it down. So I'd get up, rush downstairs, find a pen. Half the time, by the time I found the pen, I've forgotten what I've got to write. So after a while of getting frustrated like that, I actually put a pen and paper by the bed. And the missus obviously not too keen when I wake up and start scribbling. But at the end of the day, I got a few ideas down. And a few years later, I thought, you know what, I wonder if I can tie these things together. Because really, most of these dreams were completely unrelated. And I didn't really know where they were coming from. There was weird and wonderful things that were going on in them. Some of them that I couldn't even write down without getting censored. But after many years of doing this, I suddenly realised where it was coming from. And it was mostly films that I'd watched the night before, or music that I'd listened to over and over again, because I'm very much of a stickler for listening to things on repeat. Yeah. And basically, I think it was films and music that inspired the dreams. And then the dreams became so prolific, and I kept having the same things, and it would happen the same way every time. So that's basically, each chapter is pretty much one of those dreams.
Oh, fantastic. It's strange how the creative process sort of develops. I've not heard it in that way before, so I don't know if that's commmen for people. That it's
I have no idea, because other than yourself
and that sort of stuff, I think many of us writers have sort of, it's like have little ideas spark in your head and that sort of thing, particularly during the writing process. Now, quite often, like Stephen King, for example, he'll sort of start off with a character and then just start running with that character and seeing what happens with that character. But from what you're saying, it sounds like you've sort of got your ideas pretty much together first, and then the writing was just getting them down.
Yeah, I mean, it all started when I actually started writing. It started with the final chapter of the way it would finish.
Yeah.
And then because I'd never done any writing, I sort of used in a business sense, if you like, I preempted, well, what if it's any good? If it's any good, somebody might want me to do some more. So before I'd even written the thing, and before I even knew what was going to happen, mostly, I did the final chapter and left it as a cliffhanger. So that if ever anybody spots me and says, oh, you know, that was quite good, I could always say, well, I can do more. But then as it sort of developed, it sort of became so big that what was my final chapter ended up being in the middle of it. So it then spread forwards and backwards. And then when I finally got to the end, I decided, I don't care whether anybody likes it or not. I ain't doing any more. It's going to kill me if I do any more of this story. I've subsequently gone on to try and write some other stories, but this particular trilogy, for anybody who ever finds it and does read it, it does start and it does finish. So you're not going to be trapped in the what happened next scenario. At the end, it is the end. Well, I mean, if somebody wanted to pick it up, the character could be put into alternate different scenarios. But in my story, it finishes, and I wouldn't say happy ever after, but it does finish.
I think for new authors, when you first publish a book, when readers see just one book from one author, it's sort of like, hang on, is this just like a tester? Is this sort of just a personal quest? But when you've sort of put a trilogy together and you've started producing other books, they then start to say, oh, actually, this is an author, not just somebody that wanted to have a go. And I think there's a lot of very successful authors that write to market. And I'm not sort of going to rubbish the very successful authors, but the stories are very much the same,
Yeah,
and the same structure and everything, and it's almost like it's the same characters
yeah.
telling the same story. And for me personally, that's a very frustrating thing. I think from my point of view as a writer, I don't think I could ever do that, because as you've found out yourself, the the characters come alive as you're writing the story. And
Yeah.
even though you've had your dreams through that, I'll be very surprised if you didn't tell me that the extra things happened as you were writing it.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like I say, the initial probably, if we were to categorize it to say 6 ideas, 6 dreams,
Yeah,
were the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then what filled in the gaps were other stuff that came along. Other inspirations might just crop up in my mind. I'll play a song on my stereo, and I think, oh, okay, that might work, and it,
yeah,
it becomes a link between one dream that I've had that is nothing to do with another dream, but then this song, well, actually, well, that'll link those two together quite well. And so, yeah, I like to call it evolution. That the whole story evolved in my head as it went along, and
yeah. I think
without boring you with the minutiae, I'm sort of quite into tattooing. Although you can't see anything; it's all hidden. But there's a tattoo that's involved in the book. It's part of the story, as you'll be well
yeah,
aware because you've read it.
yeah,
But that is also part of me. So whilst I was having some of these tattoos, they were creating story, and
yeah,
it
yeah.
was a combination. Is this story writing the tattoo, or is the tattoo writing the story? And
Well,
I never really got to the bottom of that.
I've for the first trilogy I did, I had that sort of a similar scenario really, where it felt as if I wasn't writing the story anymore. The story, like the characters had come alive in my mind, and they
Mm,
would tell me what was happening.
yeah,
And that's such a great situation to be in, where the creativity sort of almost takes you over. I think people have lots of different ways of being creative. Some people sort of like building things and building artwork or painting and that sort of stuff. But there's something special about writing, where the creative mind can sort of explode. And because we see the movie in our mind, and
yeah.
obviously when Netflix come calling, we actually finally see it on the screen. But
Yeah. It's
even
funny
if
you can
that
say that because what one of my first people that read the book, obviously quite enthusiastic. He's a friend, so he's not going to slaughter me. But the first thing that he said after he read it was, I'll have a word with Spielberg for you because this will make a great whatever." And obviously he doesn't know Spielberg, and nor do I. But the principle being was that he read it and
he
felt
enjoyed,
immersed in it, and
yeah,
thought, well, if this was trilogy, well, I don't know. There's a word for it.
the
I'm not,
trilogy.
syndicated. That's the word. Yeah. If
Oh,
it
oh
was
yeah, okay.
syndicated, it would make it a sort of Game of Thrones ish type, seven
Okay. Oh
seasons.
yeah, okay.
Then you'd have an episode per chapter, and I
Episode,
don't know.
yeah,
I've got something like 50 odd chapters in the 3 books altogether. So
yeah.
there's 50 episodes, which could be 5 seasons. That's the way he looked at it. And I thought, yeah, I like that idea. But then finding somebody or somebody finding me is a completely different subject.
Well, I think breaking through as an author is very, very difficult, because
Mm.
people can self-publish now. Anybody can write a book,
Yeah,
and I've sort of come across lots of different levels, and because of the editing work that I do, and for in things like Scriberfile, which is a shared platform where authors check and edit each other's work, I get very good at spotting errors, and it's helped my writing, because when I'm writing now, I start to spot the errors that I've spotted in other people's writing. So that sort of helps me massively. Um, doesn't mean to say I don't make mistakes, and that's why it's important to have other people, checking on your work.
yeah. Well,
But
that's why you've read my second edition, because when I
yeah,
first did it, obviously I didn't think of it as a first edition. It was just a book. But
Yeah.
then when I actually read it back myself, I was absolutely gutted at how many mistakes I found after having professional people help me edit, typesetting, pictures done for covers. Everything's done as professionally as I could do it, with a
Yeah.
little bit of help from people who know what they're doing. And still, when I read the book, when I bought it from Amazon, I was absolutely mortified at how many basic, silly mistakes were there.
It's
So
easy. It's easy
I've done
to.
it again.
It's easy to sort of have mistakes like that. I'm not just talking about sort of self-published work. Work that's gone through traditional publishing. I
Yeah.
find so many mistakes.
Oh
Not
yeah, absolutely.
things
Yeah. I mean,
in
silly things just like punctuation, that
in
stuff.
traditionally published work is not perfect by any means.
No.
Um,
Well, that's why I
and
did the second edition, to try to iron it out as best I can. It's probably
yeah,
not perfect now, and I'm sure you'll have found many mistakes in it, but the major stuff that it would make people laugh at how bad it was, they're all
yeah.
in the first edition. So anybody seeing this, buy the second edition.
The I spoke with a lady who showed me her books that had been professionally edited, and on the very first page, I found like 4 mistakes,
Yeah,
and she'd paid for professional editing.
yeah,
Now, I don't generally pay for professional editing. I use Pro Writing Aid, which is a very good professional editing software that
yeah,
sort of catches some, but not everything. But I think
yeah,
for me, I think it's about building a process. So I'll sort of have my chapters, my titles for my chapters, and the short description of the chapters, and then looking at the length of that chapter, and then I've got another element that is looking about the timeline. It's quite difficult when you're in the creative mindset to keep track of the days,
very, very
because
different. Yeah, I found
because
that because mine also, because I've got a certain amount of, without giving any plot lines away, there's a certain amount of traveling from one reality to another and one timeline to another. It can become extremely embarrassing to not remember what colour hair the guy had in
yeah,
chapter one, and what his birth date was, and how old he is.
yeah, I think, and as well, the sort of like within the story, breaking the tranquility of solitude, the build up to the eclipse, sort of the tri-eclipse sort of thing, the time that was going to pass before that happened, categorizing each day that passes to get to that. Now, I didn't get to stato and go through the detail of that, but I mean, that is something that in my writing I would be cataloging that. So much so, in one of my recent works, The Healer, it started off in the autumn, and then as I'm writing the book, I'm sort of realizing, well, actually, this must be getting pretty close to Christmas. So then, and I've not mentioned Christmas. So like I'm resetting and going through all my timeline to sort of, and then incorporate the sort of build up to Christmas within the story.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's
totally
easy
get
to,
that.
it's easy to lose track of the time. And
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky in the fact that I'm in a fantasy world where time means nothing, sort of thing. So I could get away with it. It was only amount of days that need to pass, but the seasons and things like that, and again, partly because it was my first attempt, it
yeah,
sort of, I could lose it. Whereas the work I'm doing at the moment is very date specific. It's spread
yeah.
over a 12 or 14-day period, so I've got to be careful that I get things right. Otherwise, something's happened and it's took too long.
I'm glad you touched on that. The seasons, that's another element as well to sort of add further depth to a story. The seasons passing. And it's quite funny in like we see some TV shows and films and that sort of stuff, as well as books. They never mention anybody eating. So it's
No,
like,
no. Well, and I actually put, I deliberately allude to the stupidity of most fiction. Nobody goes to the toilet. And
Yeah.
I actually even mention it in the book. Is like the guy said, one guy says to the other, "How come I never see you go to the toilet?" And that's just my way of alluding to the fact that whenever you watch a TV show or read a book, nobody ever goes to the loo. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, why don't we put it in there? So I did.
Well, you've got. I'm just thinking actually. There's I was rereading part of Finding Love in 2045, which was my first novel, part of the trilogy. And I was going to do a live reading of chapter 16, which is a very sort of pivotal chapter. And I'd got it all ready to do, and I was going to send it. I was going to do it, and then I thought this is a bit too on the heat level. Was a bit too high.
Okay. Was it a little bit raunchy?
Yeah, it was a little bit raunchy. So I thought maybe not best to sort of to just put that out there, because a guy with a black country accent talking about romance scenes is probably it's probably not the best. But the reason I mention that is she goes to the toilet after they've done the deed, sort of thing.
Oh, okay.
And without going into sort of too much detail, and he'd gone into the bathroom when she was already in there, and she sort of covered herself up as if to say, "Yeah, we might have had sex, but you can't see me naked."
Yeah, which
That's,
is life. It's real life, isn't it? So
yeah, it's sort of
it's one of those situations where you're sort of telling warts and all, and in my mind, I'm thinking, well, does the reader want to know that? But then on the other hand, if I don't put it in, I'm not being true to myself.
Well, it's making it as realistic as possible.
Mm.
And for the reality is, when you watch a romance movie, you'll see the characters sort of in an embrace and that sort of stuff, and you'll never see the woman pop off to the loo after. You never see that happen. But we all know that's quite a common occurrence and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's gone down a darker line or a lighter line than we expected. Yeah, what I wanted to just touch on before we finished, amongst all the other shows we've done, I think this is the 58th interview. There's so many that I just want to touch on now. They sort of come to mind, sort of like with this chat. Jen McLeod, her writing process was like the third interview I did. Jean Rowland, that was a particularly good interview, talking about writing for yourself, which effectively is what we're doing. We're not writing to market. We are writing for ourselves and enjoying our own creative process. I'm jumping down there as well. MG Cobbett, enjoy the process. We don't do it for the money, and I think that's it. that was quite a good one. It is a good job. Shanae Chase, the importance of a mentor. Now, I think it is important, I think, with writing, if you're going to publish your work, is maybe if you can get a mentor, that's perfect. But I mean, sharing the work with others. And I think Scribophile, Dylan West on another interview, introduced me to Scribophile. He talked about how he improved his writing and his sales. And then the introduction of Scribophile, which is like it's an online sharing platform where you share some of your work, and you cost you points effectively for doing that. And then when you review other people's works, you get points for reviewing theirs, and it's like a shared process. And I found that particularly good, better than a writing group, in fact, because with writing groups, you get comfortable with the people that are in the group, and you don't really want to be too pointed. And I would be anyway, because that's just my way. But I think people are quite polite in a writing group because you're going to be reviewing theirs. But with Scribophile, it's not so connected. And I made a point of not reviewing the work of people that had reviewed on mine, because I wanted to keep it all sort of separate. And I think that's an important part of developing as an author, is getting creative feedback from people on a similar journey. Lisa Hayden, challenge yourself. It's a big challenge, isn't it, writing your own book?
Absolutely. I mean, I found it a challenge to find the time in some respects because you've got a day job, and in my case, I do a bit of football coaching in the evening, and it's then I find myself having the best ideas at 2 o'clock in the morning when really I need to be getting to bed to go to work the next day. But I've got to get that idea down, so it ends up being 4 o'clock before you go to bed, and
Yeah,
it's
I think
it's something that's why it's took best part of 10 years to do, I suppose.
I guess the professional authors of they just have their breakfast and then go and sit down for 8 hours and are writing for 8 hours. Well, it's
Yeah,
a nice
I mean,
position to
I
be
guess,
in.
I mean, it'd be interesting to know, but I mean, it is a day job for them, so they can set aside however many hours they
Yeah,
want. But I don't, I just find it difficult to switch on and off in that respect.
yeah,
Sometimes I want to write something, I've got it in my mind, so I've got to do it there and then. If I think, oh, that was a great idea, there's no point me saying, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, I'll do that tomorrow. Because tomorrow it might not be a great idea and I won't be in the mood for it and it won't sound the same. So when it's a great idea, get it written down and
yeah,
then play with it later and make it into something. But if you don't write it, sometimes it's just I'll scribble it on a piece of paper. John said X, Y, Z, and then that'll
yeah.
sit on the desk for weeks. And then suddenly I think, oh yeah, actually that would fit into there, and then I'll stick it in.
That's it.
I mean, I haven't. I think I've got any examples of yeah, I've got something I wrote down here the other day, and this is not relevant to the book that you've read, but I'm doing another book which I won't tell you anything about because it's not really relevant. But um, I wrote down on a piece of paper the character alludes to a reference to Close Encounters. Now,
Yeah,
obviously, Close Encounters, very famous film. We all know all about it, but the reference will be something to do with the music. Everybody remembers the and these hand
yeah,
movements and all that, and it was something along the lines of that, where this guy's doing some sort of deaf hand signals, and it relates to the tones on the music
yeah.
of,
Okay.
of Close Encounters. And
Yeah, yeah.
that just came into my head, and I thought, yeah, that'll work. So I
Interesting
wrote it
thing.
down, and this has been like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I still haven't done anything with it. But I
Yeah,
know at some point that's going to go in. That's a great idea, but
yeah, yeah.
how it'll work, I don't know yet.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people they sort of write lots of stuff, and then when it gets to editing, they're chopping out stuff as well. I think one thing the Joe Paulson mentioned is and something to be careful of is don't bury the lead, sort of maintain the pace. Like
Mm,
sometimes we can sort of be on a particular theme and then go off on a tangent, and if you're not careful, you can lose track of the
yeah,
pace of the story, and that's something to
yeah.
be careful of. But I think as writers, I think we're all learning, and I think it's Alessandra Torre said to me that, or said that sort of don't worry about your first books; it'll be awful. I'm thinking that's not very nice. But
Yeah.
then
Oh,
I
but it's
read
probably
her
not
first
probably
book.
not far from the truth, though, is it? Because we'll
I
your
read her
first book
first
is
book.
where you're learning, I suppose.
Yeah, I read her first book, and she's right; it was awful. But I mean, every book sort of will move on a pace.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, my
Well,
brother.
hence why I've got my first edition, which was awful. Second edition is probably not much better, but it's got less mistakes. And I have got an idea of doing a compendium, which is all three parts together,
Yeah,
where I insert all the bits that you've just said that might detract because I'm going down tangents. They're the bits that I've took out to try and condense it into a readable book. But they're
yeah,
also interesting and fun bits, a bit anecdotal and
yeah,
sort of background of characters. So if I do finally get round to doing that compendium, I'll put all those bits back in, and the whole thing will be about 500,000 words. But whether I'll sell a copy or not is questionable. But you
and
know,
that's the challenge. I think we've got to a point where we enjoy the writing process, enjoy the editing and development process, enjoy the publishing process, and then whatever sales we get, we're happy with the sales we get, and we don't expect to be called on to Good Morning Britain or whatever.
no,
It's we're just enjoying our lot, and
I mean, yeah, yeah.
if it
I
takes
mean,
off, if it
it's one
takes
of
off,
those things that
great.
if I was to be told you can sell 100,000 copies and you'll never sell any more, and you get £1 a copy, or you can sell 1,000,000 copies but you don't get anything, I'd take the million copies and get nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
Much prefer that to making a reasonable, even if it was a large amount of money, I'm not really interested. I mean, yeah, somebody gives me £100,000, I'm not going to say no. But on the other hand, in terms of my writing, I'd just rather people read it and tell me that they liked it, or read it and tell me that they didn't like it. I don't mind.
I think that's the
It's,
essence, Eddie.
yeah,
I think that sums it up perfectly, I think, and a good place to close, really. I think we've had joy writing it, gone through the pain and the torture of putting it all together, and whether it's 1, 10, 100, or thousands that read it, it's all a pleasure for every read and to get feedback and response from people's writing.
absolutely. Well, and the aim is, if I can get 1 million people to read it, just give me a penny each.
Yeah, nice one, Eddie. It's been great to have you on, and I hope you check into the other interviews and that sort of stuff, because I've improved as an author from the interviews we've been having, and I learned from every single one, including this one. So that's been very good. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. The Budding Author Podcast on YouTube and on Spotify. Subscribe and all that jazz, and love to hear your comments on the interviews. So thank you very much, and goodbye. Thank you. Cheers, Eddie.